It's 3 a.m. and your phone rings. No one usually calls at this hour, but hazy and unsure of whether or not you are dreaming, you roll over and decide to take the call. Upon answering, turning to the first page of the book, you find yourself in direct conversation with Kay, pulled into the complicated, multi-directional love triangle that keeps Sputnik's sweetheart in orbit. You soon realise that you too have been sucked into anti-gravity, and, reaching out for your nightlight, you are confused to find that the more you pick at the finer pen strokes that underpin the text, the more it tears your understanding apart. The narration is unreliable. It jumps around, planting new ideas as quickly as it uproots them. The ending is uncanny. Rather than sealing off the narrative, it paves the way to more questions, as do many of the central events. Sumire calls Kay at 3 a.m. to ask the difference between signs and symbols, a question which she reiterates from Miu, who previously asks her the same. The characters also cogitate on sexual interest, what love is, or the makings of a good story, the latter of which, in being self-reflexive, takes on the form of a meditation bell, ringing to remind us that we too have been devoured into the narrative. While Kay is often capable of delivering Sumire to some sort of answer, the surrounding narrative comes apart as he seeks his own. This augments the slippery nature of the novel. There is no definitive truth and no true locus of meaning. So as to feign the illusion of hope for those desperate to weld some loose ends or wires together, Murakami sets certain tropes and literary devices to work. In this video, we'll consider gates and telephones and how these two might overlap one another. Gates are central to the narrative for various reasons. One example is the haunting story that Kay tells Sumire when they discuss the makings of a good narrative. He describes an ancient Chinese ritual where a gate would be built up, bones would then be gathered from old battlefields and sealed off within it. Dogs would then be brought to the gate, their throats would be slit, and their blood would be scattered over the gate to mix old blood with new. This story brings us to one of the central themes of Sputnik's Sweetheart, a blurring of boundaries between this world and the other side. While this haunts us at the end of the novel, causing us to question whether either of them, or perhaps both, have crossed over, it is also pivotal, as we are first told that they met by pure chance, when Kay is standing in front of the main gate of the college, reading a Paul Nizan novel. We can feel Nizan's essay Les Chiens de Garde echoing through this section. The watchdogs in Nizan's philosophy diffuse through the sacrificial dogs at the Chinese gate. Although the telephone and telephone box do not particularly come to life in Sputnik's Sweetheart's magical real estate, they often resurface to piece fragments of the plot together, or conversely to further tear them apart, adding more questions and more layers of mystery.
Hello?
Throughout the novel, we are immersed in the ghosts of Kay and Sumire's ponderous phone calls. But what is the point in these, and what have they got to do with gates? Well, gates conjure up images of heaven or hell, the afterlife or the other life. Throughout the novel, telephones and telephone boxes seem to hold the same status, existing in a non-place outside the general reality of the narrative. They submerge into a dreamlike realm, and we do see various sections dealing with this surreal undertone. Here we might consider the recurring allusions to the Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross, both in reference to the original poem and to F. Scott Fitzgerald's response, in which he says, "In a real dark night of the soul, it is always 3 o'clock in the morning." Significantly, this is when the majority of the calls between our protagonists take place, a 3 a.m. liminal zone, squeezed between late night, early morning, much like the start of our conversation. Reminded of the time you might let out a yawn, our phone call with Kay has run on much longer than expected and your battery is running low. We keep disconnecting, reconnecting, and you're tired of hearing your phone beep at you. As you pull your duvet over your head, however, your eyes seem to widen rather than fall back into the lull of sleep. Your eyelids refuse to gel. You're awake now, and you can't forget about the phone call. Irritated, you sit up, a bit too suddenly perhaps. You start to feel dizzy and lightheaded, but nevertheless, you roll over and think back to the start of the call, reconnecting with Sputnik and its multi-directional voyage. Looking into the disjointed nature of the text, we might consider how prominent thinkers in this strand, such as Jacques Derrida or Hélène Cixous, often weave psychoanalysis into their interpretations. Through psychoanalysis, we might argue that we can see the deconstruction of the human psyche. Its ideologies enable us to pull things out of the absurd and examine the signs and signifiers presented to us in daily waking life. Taking Freudian analysis into consideration, we can see how his fourth Dar principle is applicable to readings of Sputnik Sweetheart. The clues Murakami provides in the text float in rough water, bobbing in and out to reveal themselves briefly before being quickly reclaimed by the waves. Murakami's use of telephones and gates plays with this principle. They can both be seen to represent a fragile veil of being here, where you are seen or heard, or being there, on the other side, unable to communicate.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in...
Avital Ronell proffers a curious take on this, saying that the telephone operates on both sides of the life and death switchboard. She extends her deconstruction to the purpose of the telephone as literary device to Freud's castration complex, contending that via the telephone, nothing or no one is cut off. Early on in the novel, as Kay is still introducing us to Sumire, he points out that she hasn't got a phone in her new apartment, and quickly adds that she hasn't got a decent mirror either. While this could castrate Sumire, cutting her off from the commodity of instant communication, the allusion to mirrors is also interesting. It brings us to think about psychoanalytic theories of infant development, such as in Lacan's mirror stage. Might Sumire's lack of access to a mirror, which would help her build an image of herself, or a telephone which would connect her to the outside world, inhibit her personal development and be the root of the slippery nature of her character? By now, the phone in your hand must start to tire you, or perhaps Kay's actions have slipped into your subconscious, and like him, you switch the receiver from your left hand to your right. From this slightly altered perspective, we might consider how the motive of the telephone ties into Jung's individuation process. He says, "Going inwards means looking for the signs and symbols the unconscious dreams up for us naturally and spontaneously." He applies this to his theory of the anima and animus, which would be an expression of the collective unconscious. Sumire is a character who is caught up in dreams. She tells us through Kay, "I have these realistic dreams and snap wide awake in the middle of the night. And for a while, I can't work out what's real and what isn't." She rings him up during the dead hours to ramble on about her questions and troubles. Kay, on the other hand, is also seeking respite from his own existential queries. He says, "The closest I ever came to answering these questions was when I talked to Sumire." In taking on the role of middleman, the telephone therefore becomes a sort of gate. It takes the form of anima or animus respective to each character, and helps them journey inwards to the other side, in search of fortifying their images of themselves.